Happy holidays and welcome to Cult Movie Cult's 2020 holiday special. I'm Mark Dickerson.
And I'm Jeremy Fink, and for our gift to you, we'll be discussing two naughty films cooked up in Santa's workshop. Ho ho hold on to your chestnuts, you little elves. This is Silent Night, Deadly Night and Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2.
Hello?
Merry Christmas.
Who is this?
Santa's back.
Punish! Naughty! Who killed your parents?
You really want to know?
Who, Ricky?
Santa Claus.
Punishment is necessary, Pamela. It is good.
Red car. Good point. Sounded like some squirrel getting its nuts squeezed. Shh. Naughty.
You're safe now. Santa Claus is gone. Garbage Day!
Huh? No!
Silent Night, Deadly Night is a 1984 American slasher film directed by Charles E. Sellier Jr. It follows the story of a young boy named Billy who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder after his parents are murdered by a man dressed as Santa Claus. He grows up holding on to his terrified feelings about Christmas and eventually goes on a violent spree of punishment, dressed as Santa.
Yeah, and Jeremy, coming out of a series, anytime we come out of a series to do one of these specials, it's just fun to turn the old brain off, sit back, watch a holiday-themed slasher flick like this one. And I was glad to revisit it, definitely. You hadn't seen either of these before, right? You weren't really aware of these, I don't think.
Yeah, so I'd heard of them. Obviously, just being a huge slasher fan, they kind of pop up on, at least the first one pops up on every list. You kind of can't avoid it. But I was saying to Mark before we recorded here, it's one of those movies where I personally tend to go on my slasher binges during the month of October, and I've never really been in the mood for a Christmas movie during October. So I never took the plunge on this one, and now I finally did, and I'm happy I did.
Exactly. It's a trip. I mean, both of them are, and you kind of get to relive the first one, I guess, in the second one, which we'll get to, because you can't talk about one of these movies without talking about the other one. So we figure, hey, let's just do both of them at once, and we'll just call it our holiday special. So when I saw the first Silent Night, Deadly Night, I was a bit confused because I was having a feeling of deja vu. And I soon figured out why that was. It's because of the excessive use of footage from the first one in the second one. Because I believe I had seen the second one first. So that was a little confusing to me at first. Because when I first had wanted to talk about this and I rewatched it, I was a little confused. And then I started to realize why that was. Because I wasn't, I went straight to the sequel. After seeing like a meme online of how bad the acting was in the second one and how funny it was, I just wanted to check that one out, and I didn't think it had much to do with the first one, so I just watched that on its own, and then soon realized that they used actual footage from the first one in the second one,
and quite a bit,
quite a bit of it. So we're gonna talk about that, but I do want to first focus on the first movie because there is a lot to discuss. I think it's very interesting in its own right, and not only because of the background, that went into making it and the movie itself, but also the controversy that arose upon its release or shortly before its release. There was quite an uproar about seeing someone dressed as Santa killing people, which we talked about a little bit, Jeremy, before we started here. It's kind of funny because it had been done before in a few movies, actually, I think, at least a couple that, just off the top of my head that I could think of. I think Christmas Evil was one. There's a couple at least. So why do you think it is that for some reason this one is the one that resonated with people? Do you think it was just the time period or the timing of it, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're talking about like peak Reagan years.
Yeah, the 80s conservatism.
It was the Reagan 80s with intense conservatism. I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's the title. Maybe it's the fact that it's playing with the song Silent Night, which is considered, a pretty, it's actually a more religious Christmas song.
Right. That might be, you might be right on
that. So it might be a
Right.
title where people hear Silent Night, Deadly Night, and it kind of goes against all of the wholesome values that they've been raised on. Yeah, because I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I would guess that the controversy happened before a lot of people saw the movie. You know, it doesn't, at least from what I've read about it, seem like people saw it and then were angry about it. It seems like it was a talking point.
It was more of like a gut reaction or like a, yeah, I think it was a talking point. I mean, if I had to take a guess, it seemed more like, it was like people's agendas to go, like we should go after this movie because it has this in it. But even though we haven't seen it or seen anything about it or know anything about it. So yeah, and definitely the time period I think helped. I mean, the Reagan years.
Yeah, it's definitely comical to just think about it now, though. The idea of something like this being controversial.
I know, it's funny. It actually came out the year I was born, 1984. Which is funny to think about. But so we, I want to get into the film a little bit and just talk about the story because, to be honest, and I still feel this way, and I will back this up again. I feel like this is actually the first one, at least, is a pretty decent slasher movie. I mean, if you're looking for a slasher movie to watch, this is by far not the worst you could do.
No.
And I've also seen a lot of slashers that had a lot less in the way of explanation or motivation for why the killer does what he does. So whether this is to the film's credit or not, or whether this is a quote unquote good film or not, that was one aspect of it that I found pretty interesting and engaging, actually. Like there's an actual plot and an actual story, and a reasoning for why this is all happening, which is more than can be said for a lot of slasher movies, I think. I mean, clearly this was made to bank on a certain exploitation of the imagery of Santa Claus, murdering people. Yeah. But having said that, I feel like there's more, I would say, motivation or backstory to what's happening than you would think or than you would normally let on. I mean, were you surprised by that amount of backstory?
Yeah, I mean, I was. I think that in my mind, what this was going to be was just a movie where there's a killer dressed as Santa and it's kind of like a whodunit slasher. Because that would be traditionally more what you would see in a movie.
More like
this.
Black Christmas.
Yeah, like Black Christmas. Yeah, which once again, we're going back a year here, but if you haven't gotten to watch Black Christmas or listen to our episode about it, highly recommend you do both of those.
Get some eggnog and
get some eggnog. It's great. It's a great movie. It's a certifiable horror classic. But yeah, so I don't know. It was surprising. Just to start going into the actual plot and events of the film here. It starts out with a family visiting their their grandfather, the grandfather of the family, who is kind of non-responsive. I don't know if it's supposed to be some type of late stage dementia.
Yeah.
But the parents leave this kid Billy, who's probably like 6-7 years old, alone with this grandpa. The grandpa turns to him and goes on this very strange little soliloquy about how Santa Claus is actually out to get.
That's a good way to put it, soliloquy.
He's
like,
out to get.
I mean, it's definitely hammy, whatever it is. It's very hammy acting.
Yeah,
but I love that scene.
And very convenient, which I love, because that's the kind of thing you can get away with in a pulpy slasher film, where the sequence of events that line up are very. There are a lot of coincidences, which is great. So his grandpa, as he says, goes on his little soliloquy. He tells the kid that Santa is looking for people who have been naughty that he can punish.
Before that even happens, the parents are kind of, like parents do with Christmas, they're building it up and they're talking to their children and getting them all excited about Santa coming and he's going to give you these presents. And then we go to the scene with the grandfather in the I guess he's in a nursing home, and the parents leave Billy alone with him, and he just kind of goes off. He actually was not speaking at all when he's around the parents, and then he just starts to go into, like you said, Jeremy, this soliloquy.
Yeah, very coherent. Just totally he goes from being
lucid,
catatonic to totally lucid in like a second.
And talking about how he better, I guess Billy better watch out for Santa. If you're naughty, he'll punish you, and things like that.
And spoiler alert, Grandpa never comes back.
That's the only scene with Grandpa.
That's the only scene we get with Grandpa, which is amazing. I love that.
He leaves an impression, though. Yeah, it's a good scene. And there is a little bit of acting like that where it's a little hammy. Well, obviously the main, I have to look up his name real quick, who plays the main
I believe
slasher,
that is,
Billy.
Robert Brian Wilson.
Robert Brian Wilson.
I don't believe a relation
Wilson.
To Brian Wilson of
the
Boys.
I don't believe, but maybe. But it could be argued he's a little hammy, but with some of the lines like punish, kill, but
Yeah.
I mean, really, how can you say those lines and not have them be ridiculous? Yeah. But anyway, overall, I thought the acting in the movie was pretty, it was pretty decent. It was fine. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say that there is more like reasoning behind things in this movie than you see in most maybe horror movies or slashers, I say this because, you can see why something like what happens in this opening scene would be traumatizing to a young child. Mm-hmm. Whether or not they would go on to murder people, that's up for debate. Mm-hmm. Maybe if there's an imbalance or something like that. But so what ends up happening is when they leave the orphanage, or I'm sorry, when they leave the getting ahead of myself. Yeah. When they leave the when they leave the nursing home, we actually have a short scene of someone dressed as Santa robbing a convenience store, I believe, and kills the clerk when the clerk pulls a gun on him. And what ends up happening is I believe they stop. I don't know if they stop to help someone on the side of the road dressed as Santa, or they're kind of like, they're laughing like, oh, look at this person. They're probably going to a holiday party or something like that.
I do believe they actually stop.
Yeah, he's like waving them down, I think. Yeah. And then so he ends up shooting and killing the parents, this person in a Santa suit, and
which I just like to make a note of that, which I thought was an interesting thing, because you have this guy dressed as Santa who goes from being like a petty thief who's just trying to rob a convenience store, to being a brutal, vicious murder rapist. Yeah. It's like,
I know, it's like, was he going around looking for? Yeah, because you could almost argue the first time he killed someone, it was in self-defense, and then you have this scene where it's just like you said, completely brutal. He just snaps. And he's like a lunatic, like he just he's like a maniac in a Santa suit basically, on the side of the road, and he ends up shooting his father and like assaulting Billy's mother and killing her as well. And all the while Billy is watching from the car, or I think he's actually like hiding in the bushes at this point, like running away, and Ricky is there as well, his younger brother, who's gonna become very important soon. Not very much in this movie, but in the next one he will.
He's there.
Yeah, so he's there somewhere in the background. And so they're watching all this happening, and you can see this being very traumatic. So later on we catch up with them as through the years, growing up in an orphanage with we have the nuns and Mother Superior there. So both Billy and his younger brother Ricky are there. But we really focus on Billy, and he's a very disturbed young child, I would say. He's drawing violent pictures of Santa Claus being killed, and this obviously concerns the nuns and Mother Superior, and they allude to this sort of brewing evil with Billy, and they say it seems to get worse for him every Christmas. And so from there, we kind of have the like a typical scene you see in a slasher movie where a young couple is getting a little amorous with each other. They start getting, start having sex.
They're getting a little naughty.
Getting a little naughty, exactly. And Mother Superior catches them. I think Billy actually watches them. I didn't know if they were like people that worked there or who they were exactly, but
or if they're supposed to be like 18-year-old orphans, because in horror movies, in horror movies, anyone above the age of 15 looks like they could pass for 40. So they might have just been they might have been 13-year-old orphans. Yeah. For all we know, I don't know.
Up for debate, but whoever they are getting a little naughty in like a janitor's closet or something like that. But anyway, so Billy witnesses this, and Mother Superior sees it, and she starts pulling out the belt, giving them a whipping. And because Billy has seen this, she also whips Billy as well. So again, very more traumatizing going on with Billy. So they're really setting this up, is what I'm saying. Like, they're really showing you how this could happen.
Yeah. There's some serious character development going on. He's not just he doesn't just decide to go do his thing. It's slowly drilled into him.
He even punches out a visiting Santa who comes to the orphanage. Yeah. So there's that scene. So then we catch up with them in 1984, which is when the movie came out. 10 years later, and one of the nuns, I believe Sister Margaret is her name, she gets Billy a job in a toy store, stocking the shelves, and we see adult Billy for the first time. He's just kind of like, he's a very like imposing figure. The actor wasn't in many movies, but he definitely has a presence, I would say.
For sure.
And he sort of has this like naivete to him, where it's like, you could see him sort of still being that little boy, but with this sort of imposing figure, and obviously he's older now. We get a little montage at this point showing Billy being a model employee, helping customers and things like that.
With a great 80s jam.
Really, yeah, nice 80s jam in the
Great
background.
80s piece of music behind it. You gotta love
happy,
that. Yeah.
happy little montage there, which is a nice juxtaposition, to what's going to happen. And I think he begin. So does Billy begin an affair with another employee, or is it just kind of like a fling? Well, I guess to him it was more, but we find out that...
No, I don't think Billy actually had any relation. I think Billy had like a dream that he was having.
Oh, that was only a dream. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
He had a dream that he was having some, as we said before, naughty relations with this coworker of his, and he wakes up all freaked out because of his dream.
Okay. Okay.
Realistically, it seems like the coworker is having a little bit of an affair with another coworker who's kind of a schmuck.
Yeah, that's how I described him. Actually, in my notes was like schmuck, or just like a kiss ass. He's just like everyone works with someone like that. I feel like.
He's a classic like '80s from the minute he comes on screen, we're like, oh, this guy's supposed to be an antagonistic presence.
He's gonna be trouble. This guy, he's definitely gonna get killed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is great because what's cool about this, and this is something because we haven't actually. Other than Black Christmas, I think we've hardly talked about slashers at all on this show, which is
not
wild.
As much as we want to, Jeremy.
We definitely will do a slasher series at some point.
Yes,
but like what's cool about the slasher genre and that I love about it, particularly in the 80s, is that it's so driven by formula because there were certain things they had to hit. And obviously we could spend a whole episode going into the history of slasher films, but briefly, a lot of it was that they were trying to compete for. It was when you got the first kind of wave of VHS tapes that people could buy, and so they were all trying to compete to see who could do the most shocking thing. That way, when people were like talking about it with their friends, trying to decide, like teenagers trying to decide what movie they were going to watch together on a Friday night, they wanted the one with the most intense gore, the most gratuitous nudity. They wanted all that stuff. So there were kind of these landmarks that you had to hit in a slasher film. Yeah. And I think this one understood its genre, but also did some pretty interesting and creative things to subvert that as well.
Definitely. And you get into the video nasties and like you said, Jeremy, it's like a lot of these movies came out and they immediately wanted to have some sort of rep, because there were so many at this time. They wanted to stand out in some way with their own killings, with their own creative use of, of violence.
Of a phallic weapon.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, because like you said, they always have the certain beats they hit. It's like there has to be certain things there for the film to be a slasher, but that's the fun of it. It's like how do you play around with that? How do you change it up? What do you add to it? To make it more over the top or stand out more. So you saw a lot of that at this time, and that's why I think the fact that this even exists is really just due to that, because they, I'm sure the filmmakers just wanted to top whatever else was out at the time, and put their mark on it. So that's where what it comes down to, I think. But anyway, so back to the movie. So the Christmas time is coming, and you see around the store where Billy works, you see more imagery of Santa, and Billy's beginning to feel a little naughty. Like I said, he the actor who plays Billy. Robert Brian Wilson, he's just he has this there's something about him. He has that charm to him, but then it's mixed with this darker, more sinister side, and I think he for the most part plays it pretty well. Like I said, the script.
There's only so much you can do.
There's only so much you can do.
I don't think they were on set saying, "What's my motivation?"
Yeah,
I think it was this is what you're doing.
I believe this was like this must have been either his first role or early role for him.
First big movie,
actually, it was his first role, I believe.
Okay.
So so that's why there is that like naive charm, I guess, to him. But also, at points he's genuinely pretty frightening, I think. And and if it was maybe played a different way or in a different movie, a different director or whatever, I think it really could have been even more effective. But again, somehow everything he's doing makes sense to him in his own head, and that's like the mark of a good villain or a good killer, whatever, slasher, whatever, like as long as it makes sense to them what they're doing, then you can kind of go along with it, I think. And that makes even just villains in movies or in comic books, like the Joker is like the one that always comes to mind for me, just like a maniac who's completely evil, but you kind of get why he does what he does because he has his own way of thinking of things. So Anyway, so that's Billy, and he's getting a little more sinister at this point. And then the boss of the store makes the mistake of asking Billy to play Santa for the store. And this does not go well.
No.
This, this is where things really go off the rails. And also, Jeremy, I do like that once Billy puts on the Santa suit, it's on him for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Like, he becomes truly deranged.
Santa. Yeah.
He becomes Santa. And he's just mumbling things like naughty and punish. And they really went all the way with it, with what they had, I guess. So that's something to be said for this movie. And I also like the scene very shortly after this where he's playing Santa and having the kids on his lap. And it's like I was actually laughing and kind of cringing at the same time when he has these kids sitting on his lap and he's like whispering to them these like demonic things and about, how he's going to punish them and, kind of funny, but also pretty creepy.
Yeah. That was definitely one of the most actually disturbing.
Yeah.
See, I don't think it was really supposed to be either. I think they probably threw that scene in. Obviously it's a horror movie, so everything they want to be a little disturbing, but I think that was just almost a scene just to set up his character and almost be a little funny. But I don't know, me that was a scene that was
the whole imagery of it was just very unsettling.
Yeah.
So and then we get to the Christmas party at his work, and this is when things really start to take off, when the killing really starts. So as we mentioned, there's a couple employees that are having a little flirtation or whatever, tryst or whatever you want to call it, and they go off to they sneak off from everyone else, and with that coworker who's a douchebag, and I don't know how else to describe him, with a woman that I guess Billy likes. I forget her name, but he kind of has a little thing for her, and Billy flashes back to his mother being assaulted by the Santa on the side of the road that he witnessed as a child, and he snaps, and this is his first killing. He takes some Christmas lights and strangles the coworker with them. And I thought, that's pretty clever.
Yeah, I thought that was. I mean, if we're talking about slashers, we're talking about how good, how interesting the kills are, and I think it's a great image. I mean,
yeah. And this movie does have some pretty creative kills, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what makes the slasher genre so fun and as film. It's it's not about dialogue. Sometimes they'll have a good line or something like that, like a classic line. But a slasher movie is all about visual, being inventive visually. It's all about how you push things in terms of the image and doing something that we've never seen before.
And good lines, like you said, Jeremy. And speaking of good lines, there is a very good line in this scene where, so I guess her name is Pamela, the one coworker. So then he attacks her, and he says, "Punishment is necessary, Pamela. It is good." And then he stabs and kills her. I'm not going to do that justice, but I just I really like the delivery of that line. And then he stabs and kills her.
Yeah, would like to make a note about that scene. She it was a little weird. That was one scene where, as a 21st century viewer looking back on this, was a little cringy because she was being assaulted by this dude, and then he murdered the dude, and then she was freaked out because
so I guess what I'm trying to think his reasoning of murdering her. So I guess because she was gonna tell on him, or
I don't know exactly. I maybe it was just because he
freaked out by him. I guess
freaked out. I don't know if it's because she was freaked out on him and called him a maniac or whatever the exact word was. But I can definitely of all the people in that scene, I feel like I definitely identified most with her position.
Well, I mean, he is a villain. I mean, he's evil. So it's not it does make sense in a certain way. But
that was the one break for me. Everybody else, all the other kills, I could kind of. I mean.
Oh, so it's he went away from his.
If we're talking you talk about the Saw movies, and it's he's trying to correct people who've done evil things. That was the one where I was she didn't really do anything bad. She just was freaked out because she watched him murder somebody in front of him.
I would say Billy's being pretty naughty at this point.
I mean, and I don't know. I guess trying to question the logic of someone who is murdering people dressed as Santa. I guess we could kind of just suspend our disbelief there a little bit.
Yeah, Billy has clearly already snapped at this point. But I get what you're saying. But so at this point, then he murders his boss, and with the back of a hammer, I believe. Pretty nasty way to go. And then the lights go out in the store, and the remaining guest is she discovers the bodies and panics, tries to call police, and Billy kind of stalks her around the store and kills her as she tries to escape using a crossbow.
Yes.
From the sporting goods section, I guess.
Yeah. A lot of real weapons in that toy store.
Yeah, but it's funny because then when you look at the dart that goes in her, it looks like a
toy
almost
dart,
like a toy dart. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So again, like another kind of like creative kill at least. Like at least he wasn't just walking around shooting people. You know, it was more than that. So that's good. At least that's what you want from one of these kind of movies. You know. So at this point, Billy is full on Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, you know, whoever you want to use as your go-to slasher guy. But he's pretty much completely deranged at this point, and he just starts stalking and, you know, walking around killing anyone he perceives to be engaging in what he perceives to be naughty behavior. And he comes upon a house with a young couple having sex, of course. While, you know, I guess they're supposed to be watching like her younger sister or something like that. And and then we get another punish, you know, so monotone. I love how he says
punish
all and stabs the woman into another creative kill, into the horns of a mounted deer's head on the wall.
I will say that is one of my favorite slasher movie kills maybe ever.
It's a good
one. I mean, there's definitely others that stand out, but like that's such a creative solution.
Yeah. that was
so,
a good one.
Like that's
and that imagery of her after he stabs her into it.
Yeah.
Her just kind of like almost hanging there on that mounted deer is like kind of like eerie.
Yeah.
And they kind of linger on it a little bit actually.
Well, and also how when her boyfriend comes up to look for her, because she's up high, he doesn't see her at first. But we see her. It's like
it adds to the suspense.
Yeah, it's very good. It's well done. So it's
pretty well done. Yeah,
pretty well done.
Scene. And then so because when the boyfriend discovers her, he tries to call the police, and obviously Billy isn't having that, so he strangles him with the phone cord and throws him through a window just for good measure there. Although Billy does spare the young girl though, who's present. He's asks her, "Have you been good or have you been naughty?" And gives her like a bloody pocket knife.
I believe it's a bloody box cutter as a gift.
Oh, box cutter. Okay. Okay. So he got it from the stores. That makes sense.
Yeah. It was what he killed. I forget her name, but the coworker who he was crushed out on.
Oh, okay.
He killed her with that, and I guess he put it in his Santa pocket.
Okay, it makes perfect sense.
And brought it with him, and then
yeah, because I didn't know where he got it from at first.
Yeah, then gifted this child a bloody box cutter.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
And he's smiling too while he hands it to her.
It's kind of sweet. It's you know what it is? That is to put it in screenwriting terms. That is the save the cat moment. in a very deranged way.
Well, also it's showing that he does have this inner logic to what he's doing somehow, and I guess maybe he has an affinity for younger children because of what happened to him and being at the orphanage and all of that. So at this point, the police are on Billy's tail, tracking him down across town. And then we get this scene in the woods, which I love. It's the sledding scene, which is, I think, pretty infamous, but I think it's one of the best kills in the movie, where it's just like a group of kids, and it's kind of like a long sequence, actually, where they're just talking to each other and hanging out. It's almost like a different movie. I don't know if they were just trying to pad that runtime or what, but we have this whole scene with them, and but it's kind of like this nice, it's just like a bunch of friends in the woods, like hanging out, shit talking each other, and one of them, they're sledding, and one of them goes down the hill, and by the time he gets to the bottom of the hill, he doesn't have a head. But it's funny because he just keeps sledding down the hill. This headless corpse is just going down, and I guess he slashes his head off or whatever he did.
I will say I did actually really like that whole sequence, because I think that we're so used to in slasher movies, and by 1984 the slasher genre was well established. We were already kind of getting into the second wave of the slasher genre where it started getting a little weird. But I feel like in slasher movies, whenever we're introduced to characters without context, we just assume that they're going to be the next victims. In my mind, I'm like, oh, why are these kids who are sledding going to be murdered? What's gonna happen? And they had the whole nice thing where we hear the little jingle, of maybe he's coming. But then you start thinking no, he can't just murder these innocent kids. They're just out sledding. And then we have the whole bullying scene where these bullies come.
Oh yeah, you're right.
So
Okay.
so it was
Yeah.
like, I don't know, it's
sense.
one of those things where, once again, a nice little subversion, because I was ready for those kids to get murdered, and then they just walk away and probably never realize how close they came to maybe being dead.
Yeah.
So yeah, once again, just a cute little, I don't know if cute is the word, but a fun little subversion.
Yeah. Maybe Billy just saw an opportunity there.
Yeah.
With the sled coming down.
Yeah.
So we have that scene. And now we're coming towards the end of the film. And again, this is sort of an accelerated discussion because we're going to try to talk about 2 movies here, or at least 1.5. And so Billy returns to his childhood orphanage that we saw from the beginning scenes. And he's still, of course, dressed as Santa. And so we see someone dressed as Santa approaching the young children in the playground area, and Santa gets shot down by the police. But it wasn't Billy. It was someone else playing Santa, I guess. Someone who's just playing Santa for the kids. So it's pretty tragic, actually. But they shot him down thinking it was Billy. And at this point, the police kind of take over the orphanage and I guess try to get everyone out of there. But the Mother Superior doesn't want to leave. And so she's sort of holed up inside the orphanage with the police. And what do? Of course, they sing Christmas carols with all the children. But it's kind of nice having the children singing, and then what's going on outside. Then we have one of the policemen goes outside to check on what's going on and gets killed with an axe by Billy. And he gets to the doors and he's like waving at the kids to let him in. And that's when he has his confrontation with Mother Superior. And she keeps yelling at him, "There is no Santa Claus. There is no Santa Claus." And Billy raises his axe, and that's when he gets shot by the police. And he falls down, and he's comforted by the one nun, Sister Margaret, who we didn't really mention that much, but she's kind of throughout the film, I guess, sort of trying to track him down or find him, because I guess she sees something good in him, or
she gets him.
She kind of she was with him when he was growing up and stuff like that. So, so she's comforting him on the floor, and this is pretty much the end where Billy looks to all the other kids in the orphanage and he says, "You're safe now. Santa Claus is gone," and then he dies. And unlike Jason and Michael and all the rest, Billy actually dies.
He's dead, yeah.
Yeah, he's actually dead.
Yeah.
Well, he stays dead. So he dies and he stays dead. Because sometimes slashers
they do die, but then
quote unquote get killed, but then they come back. But of course, there is his younger brother Ricky to carry on the torch, who we're going to talk about in the next movie. Yes. And actually, at the end of this first movie, the camera pans up from the dead Billy, from his body to the younger brother Ricky, who looks at Mother Superior and lowers his eyebrows at her and says, "Naughty." So it does actually set up the second one.
So
which I don't know if
once again, a nice subversion. They fall off instead of it being the same killer.
You always got to have. You need some kind of sting, I feel like, at the end of one of these movies.
Yeah,
the first Friday the 13th, it's like the young Jason popping up out of the water.
Yeah. Carrie, it had like the hand.
Exactly, out of the grave.
Out of the grave, yeah. So they did set it up nicely, and obviously every Halloween movie, it's Michael Myers being ripped to shreds and then still somehow he's gone.
Yeah. Exactly.
Every time, but
just vanished.
So question mark, what do you think the message of Silent Night, Deadly Night is?
It's funny. I had the same question for you because, so it was mentioned in reviews that I saw, but I wanted to get your opinion on it. I'm going to give mine as well because you asked me as well. But some people had mentioned that there's potentially like a commentary being made here about commercialism of Christmas, things like that. But after reading about it and kind of learning about what went into the making of this film and the background and everything, I think honestly, like if I had to guess, I would say it's more the use of the Santa image and the costume more for the shock value.
Yeah.
I don't think there's personally, I don't think there's too much thought behind it. I think, a lot of, because of what you said, Jeremy, with people trying to one up each other and stand out in the market of all these slasher movies. I think it was more like, what could we come up with next? And actually Killer Santas had been done, but maybe not really done quite like this and not to this extent. And I think they really went for broke with it, with the killings. And there's a lot of, like I said, creative killings in the movie. And, I think they made their mark on it. And so that's what I take away from it. Although I just rewatched the Peanuts, the Charlie Brown Christmas special, and they talk about the commercialism of Christmas and all that. So it was on my mind a little bit. I wanted to get your opinion on it as well.
So I just, as an exercise, because I agree, I don't necessarily think this is a movie that was aiming to express a clear message or opinion one way or the other. But just because, this is a podcast and we can have a little fun, I think it might be interesting to just take that out of the equation and as if this were, like a Fellini film, just break it down and really think about what it is actually
That's
saying.
what we do here.
Yeah, because it has a lot to unpack, because it's a movie that is kind of all about morality and, when you're talking about punish and these kind of very classic religious morals where you're not supposed to do anything wrong. And it kind of takes the whole idea of any kind of confession or, forgiveness out of the equation. And just makes it like, if you do anything bad. But I don't know, it does, I think it does have kind of something interesting to say about this idea of like teaching our children that if they are naughty, then they'll be punished. And if they're nice, they'll be rewarded in such an extreme way. But the reason I asked that is because looking a little bit at the director of this film, Charles E. Sellier, not sure totally on that.
I want to talk about him.
Because he did a lot of religious, like he was an evangelical Christian, and did a lot of very religious projects in his life, which is
I think he was older at this point too, right? He was sort of like an old Hollywood. I don't know if he was Hollywood, but
he was born in 1943, so he would have been about 40 at this point. So not not super old, but you've been around for a little bit. But it is interesting because this project is such an outlier in terms of everything he's done, but also just message wise, because it's obviously offensive to Christian sensibilities. There's no way around that. But also not really, because Santa Claus isn't really a religious. He's like, I mean, I'm Jewish, so I don't totally understand the history of it. But from what I understand, like Santa and Christmas trees are actually part of Yule. They're not really part of like the religious side of Christmas. To my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Santa Claus is actually in any way really traditionally a religious thing.
No, he was created by Coca-Cola, so he's more of a he's more of a mythical figure.
So it is interesting because there might be something to say, like you were mentioning about the commercialization of Christmas, but and how in a way Santa and what we've done to Christmas is murdering the good traditional values. I don't know. We might be over. I mean, we are definitely overthinking it, but
it probably. But because of I mean, like you said, the director, his background, it kind of makes sense that maybe at least he was looking at it that way.
Yeah, that's the one thing. That's the one thing that gives me pause is just who the director is. Like if I didn't know that about his background, I'd say no, this is totally meant to be shock value. But just the fact that you have this director with this religious background, I'm like, is he saying that that Billy in murdering all these people, not that murdering is right, but that we should be enforcing some kind of strict moral code? Like so I don't know. It's
almost like it's almost like the opposite of most films where it's like the writer has a message he wants to get across, and then the director takes it and distorts it and makes it into something else. It's almost like maybe the writer was trying to exploit the genre, and because the kills were there, like in the script and what they wanted to do, and then it's almost like the director took it and kind of, maybe had a different idea. But I guess we don't really know for sure. I don't know if there's that many interviews with the director or writer. But one thing I did note, and this is interesting. We talked about the kill scenes in the movie and how creative they were and everything. And many of the kill scenes were actually not directed by the director.
Oh, interesting.
They were directed. Yeah, he had the editor Michael Spence come in, I guess, and direct these segments.
Very interesting.
Because the director was uncomfortable with handling the more gory parts of the film.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting.
It really is. Yeah. So it's almost like. And we actually see this a little bit with the second one as well, which we'll talk about. But it's almost like a director. It was sort of like a director for hire, and he didn't really, believe like what he was filming, and he didn't really want to be a part of it. But it's almost like he was doing it as a favor to someone else, and it was like one of those things, which like, all right, twist my arm, I'll direct a movie,
Yeah.
But because actually he was like also like a nature guy. I think he made like nature documentaries and things like that. So he, this wasn't really his thing, but he was behind the camera for a lot of it, most of it,
Most
not
of
the
it,
killing scenes, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I just wonder, did he just go in a different room? Like how did that work?
I don't know. I'm not sure how that worked.
Was he just like, all right, I'm gonna go drink a cup of coffee. You guys,
Yeah,
you
maybe,
guys have fun.
Yeah, it might have been something like that. Who knows? Yeah, I would love to see like footage from like on the set of the making of this movie.
I can't even imagine what it must have been.
But yeah, so that's very interesting. And also he has mentioned, I believe in interviews, that the film, or at least the script, was based on a novel. That was, I believe, I forget the name of it, but it was based on a novel, and that they kind of like adapted it for the screen. Although there's actually been no proof that this novel ever existed. I think I actually tried looking it up a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it doesn't. And I'm pretty sure it was just like an idea that someone had, that they gave it to a different screenwriter and then different director and everything, and they kind of just like made it into this movie.
I could see that being a situation where a screenwriter or producer is coming in trying to pitch it to a financier, saying it's based on a novel. There's already an audience.
Yeah, or it might have been that, or it might have been actually the writer of the novel. I think he was trying to market it, like try to sell it to studio. And I think what happened was he was not, he was very new to the scene, and they wanted someone more seasoned. So I think that's what ended up happening. But whether or not this novel exists has been up for debate. The novel. So I think even in the credits, actually, it says based on a book, and the book is called Sleigh Ride by Paul Caimi, Semi.
Who knows?
Really don't know. But anyway, so yeah, whether or not that exists or not, up for debate. So he was apparently like a Harvard student who submitted the script, and yeah, so the producers of the film, I guess, liked the idea of a killer Santa, but they wanted to expand on it. They just kind of took that single idea, which is why he gets that story by credit. So another little interesting factoid there. And we would be remiss to talk about this film and not talk about the controversy, because it was a huge part of its release, and of course leading up to the release of the film. So I want to just touch on that for a little bit. So when the film was released widely, it angered a lot of parents, particularly, and they picketed theaters. It was a big hullabaloo at this time, and they asked people to sign petitions. So actually, the film was only in theaters for 2 weeks, I believe, and then it was withdrawn, so pulled from theaters. Although it went on to have a very good life on video.
Pretty amazing that it was controversial enough to actually get it pulled from theaters. Because you hear about a lot of movies that have a big controversy,
exactly, yeah,
and still survive. Maybe it was just a money thing. Maybe the people behind it said, "Oh no, if enough people are this." But you would think if their goal is to make a controversial slasher film, they wouldn't pull it. They would love that was happening.
Well, it was controversial enough to actually have like a group actually formed because of that movie, and they were formed to protest this particular film and to lobby for it to be removed from theaters, and it was called Citizens Against Movie Madness.
That's amazing.
Which is kind of crazy, yeah. And like we said at the beginning of the show, movies have existed before with horror elements and Christmas elements and Santa Claus imagery and all these things. So it's interesting that it was just this one. And again, I think it is just, the timing of it. 1984, I mean, we were right in the midst of, like you said, like Reagan conservatism. And yeah, I think it was just like the boiling pot and the right time, right place and all that. So, but yeah, so it was a pretty big deal at the time. But actually, when the film came out, it was fairly successful. It was actually more successful than another film that came out at the same time, which was Nightmare on Elm Street. Whether or not you could believe that, whether or not it would have gone on to be as successful as that film or more successful, we'll never know, because it was actually pulled from the theaters.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, but it did decently when it came out.
It does make you kind of wonder, like, because it was pulled, could this have been? I mean, I don't necessarily think this is on the same level as a movie as A Nightmare on Elm Street. No. but it is one of those things, like, there are classic slasher movies that aren't necessarily great movies, and I do think this is a classic slasher movie. It's just much with a much smaller audience. But you do wonder, like, if it's a thing where it had stayed, because you look at a movie like a Sleepaway Camp or something like that, and if you haven't seen Sleepaway Camp, please rush out or stay home. Still during COVID here.
Jeremy, I have a confession. I have not seen it.
You have not seen Sleepaway?
No.
Well, we definitely need to get you to watch Sleep. But a movie like that I know was actually very successful at the box office. And I wonder if that contributed to its cult status despite it not necessarily being a great movie in terms of what it was trying to achieve. And so I wonder if a movie like this, if it had stuck around longer and more people had seen it in theaters, if it could have kind of hung around in a different way. But who knows, you know?
Well, yeah, we'll never know. But in just 10 days, it made, I did look up the figure, it grossed over 2.4 million.
That's substantial. That's
so in 10 days, yeah.
movie.
So we don't know what it would have done if it had gone on.
I mean, you got to think, 2.4 million in 1984.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have the inflation calculator in my head, but I have to assume that would at least be like 7 or 8 million now. You know? And so, like, that's a pretty, like, for an indie movie, like, making $7 or $8 million now in 10 days would be huge.
Yeah, it wasn't Wes Craven. I mean, I know Wes Craven wasn't exactly what he is, or what he became at that point, but yeah, like you said, it was almost like this smaller film that kind of came out of nowhere, and you know, it does happen from time to time. So I found that interesting that it actually did extremely well when it came out, and continued to do well on video.
Yeah. I mean, even just really quickly looking up, like, the Good Time by the Safdie brothers, that made $4.1 million in 2017. So this movie, and that was a really talked about movie. So we're talking about a movie here that, like, was actually quite successful financially.
Exactly. And the controversy only helped, I'm sure. And that's, you know, when we see it on video and everyone kind of picking it up, like, I'm sure, like, the word got around the schoolyard or wherever, you know, like, you got to check out this movie. It's a killer Santa. So that definitely helped. And it's funny because, like, the film was actually re-released in the spring of 1986, and almost all of the advertising for the film revolved around the controversy that was in 1984. So, but the controversy apparently did lead to the director having some difficulty finding more work, and it actually kind of I read that it forced him to retire from filmmaking, but he continued producing, and actually he directed another film that I've seen, which is funny. I didn't realize he was the same director. It's called The Annihilators. And that was in 1985, so the next year. So, and he only directed 4 movies total. So, it's just interesting. His career is kind of interesting. But anyway, so that is Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 1, or just Silent Night, Deadly Night. And we had a lot to discuss there, probably more than I even thought. So I don't know if we're going to split this episode up or not at this point, but I definitely want to move on to discussing the second one. Now, the first movie is a lot of things. The thing is, I'm going to say, I don't think I would necessarily call it a bad movie. I know that may sound strange to some people, but for a lot of the reasons that we kind of laid out during this episode, I kind of, I stand by that the film is actually pretty solid, entertaining, and at times genuinely kind of creepy slasher movie. Sure, there's some cheese in there, of course, but I feel like that only adds to it, especially with these kind of movies, Jeremy. I mean, you almost want that cheese a little bit.
Oh, totally.
To a certain point. So
I only watch slasher movies with a little cheese. I'm not interested in them without a little bit of that.
Exactly, and this movie certainly has that. But to just kind of write it off and I feel like a lot of people's like initial reaction just be like, oh, it's stupid, and just mock it. There's a lot there to mock, but I would say that it's a movie that you can also just have a lot of fun with, and just like it's pretty genuinely engaging and entertaining, and got some good kills in there. And I've seen much worse, I guess. Like Part 2. Now, Part 2. So we'll get into that now. Silent Night, Deadly Night, Part 2. That came out in 1987. And it's really hardly worth talking about the plot because, and I know we say that a lot in this show, but for this one in particular, it's almost like
too much plot to even.
It's too much, but also, so the first half hour of the film is essentially the first film.
Literally the first film. Like it's not like they're talking about what happened. It's not like. Sometimes you'll see in a sequel where there's a few little flashbacks. Like, the first half hour of this film, of Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, directed by Lee Harry, is literally about 30 minutes of footage from the first film, condensed down. The entire story. You get from the first scene of the first film to the last scene of the first film, bits and pieces of the entire story of that, as narrated by our protagonist / antagonist, Ricky, who is the little brother in the first
movie.
Silent Night, Deadly Night. He is the one who, after that horrific scene with the parents, we get one little shot holding on him, and he's also the one at the end who he says naughty, and he's just telling the story of his older brother, including details that there's no way he could have known.
I know, that's the funny part. That's the funny part to me.
Yeah.
It's like he was he was hardly in the first movie, and then I mean you could argue that he would know some of this stuff, but some of the things that he talks about in this movie, there's just no way he would have known anything about
exactly. Like there are things like, I guess you could make the case that, well, the murders would have made the news, and he would have heard about maybe how the murders happened. But like there's stuff about like his older brother being punished by a nun briefly. There's stuff like,
well, they add things like, I heard my brother screaming when the nuns attacked him in the orphanage, and which, hey, it could have happened. Like, sure, why not?
Maybe a little bit of a stretch how much he knows, but once again, we'll suspend our disbelief. But yeah, so the first half hour, just to knock that out of the way, Silent Deadly Night, the first movie, right?
We should explain the wraparound.
I guess we can. Yeah.
Well, so the second movie, the basic premise of at least the first part of it, is that Ricky is now in being evaluated by, I believe, his psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. And he's telling the story of what happened with his brother
in an institution. By the way,
in an institution.
He's not just sitting on a couch venting. He has been institutionalized because we assume that he has done something horrible that has landed him there.
So he's telling the story to the criminal psychologist who's speaking with him, and it's essentially a retelling of the first movie, and we get tons of reused footage. And that, so the first half hour is essentially that we're kind of just catching up with what happened pretty much from the first movie, which is why I felt like I had seen the first movie when I hadn't, because I had seen the second.
Because you had seen the first movie, essentially.
The second one makes excessive use of footage from the first movie. Although, oddly enough, it cuts out some of the gorier moments, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later.
What you saw was the Spark Notes version of Silent Night, Deadly Night.
That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
But from there, we do get some new footage. Actually, a lot of new footage at that point. So if you can wait out the slog of that first half hour. I mean, I'll be honest, I fast forwarded through.
Oh, same, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was clicking in like 20-second increments, and if I heard voiceover, I stuck around because granted,
some of the voiceover is good. But,
granted, I was watching it for this podcast, and I had literally finished watching the first one 5 minutes before, and did not feel that I needed to rewatch it at that point.
Yeah, I mean, most of the scenes in the beginning are just him talking to the psychiatrist, and then we're cutting to this old footage that we've seen from the first film. And where he's talking about his brother and everything that happens with him. And it's funny because these new scenes that were filmed, at least I felt like you could tell they really were dragging them out like as long as they could. They really like linger on each shot of each person. Yeah. It's just two people in a room talking, but that's and then we get these, like we said, like these almost Ed Wood level gimmicks. Like the recycling of footage at play here is just
it's wonderful.
It's amazing. And so you have that, and then this film, part 2, is also notorious for its questionable acting and over-the-top violence. So even though we have the creative kills from the first one, which we actually see again here, a lot of them, we also get some new kills towards the end as Ricky is going on his own rampage, and a lot of these are extremely, like, almost goofy, over-the-top. So not really as bloody as just, like, really out there. And the main actor, I want to talk. So who plays Ricky? Eric Freeman. I don't think he did much else, but he's very notorious for this acting, for this role. And I believe he comes from the school of eyebrow acting, where he just moves his eyebrows around a lot. I saw one of the trivia on IMDb was like how many times he moves his eyebrows in the movie.
He brought quite a bit of intensity to this.
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. I don't. It's something. It's very unique. Yeah, I'll certainly say that. It's but there is something about him. He's just very, I don't know, sort of like magnetic.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally.
And I just love watching him in this movie. And you kind of get the idea that he was being told different things from different people, maybe from the director, from the writer. Mm-hmm. It's almost like he didn't have, like, he couldn't really nail down the character because it's like so off the wall. Yeah. So let's, I guess we'll skip over the first half hour.
Although, but before we do, I just want to make one note. The opening shot of this movie, the opening shot of this movie is fantastic, and not in an ironic, jokey way. It's this really beautiful shot that easily could have been out of like a late 70s Francis Ford Coppola movie, where there's just this foot tapping, and the camera booms up and just holds on the cigarette, and then booms up further to this guy's face, and he's rocking. And like for a moment, I'm like, because I didn't know going into this what the second movie was, and I remember Mark you saying it's like a real departure, and I'm like, oh, like is the second one way better? Like is the second one like a really serious, intense movie? So I was like,
the other way with it.
What's actually interesting though is just in a quick, and I don't know how much to talk about him there really is, but this director Lee Harry actually won a Student Academy Award for a short film, I guess, or a feature called Button Button in 1978, and the film was screened by Steven Spielberg. So it's just interesting sometimes seeing these career paths. But yeah, I was pleasant, and even after the like just basically the whole first scene of this movie, and maybe that was a conscious thing because maybe, you know, I know like in the movie Primer, which we talked about on this podcast a while back, they really spent a lot of time on the first scene because they're like, oh, it's a low budget movie, so we need to reel people in and get them to believe it. So maybe they spent more time because it's like this beautiful shot, and then it goes from that to these really slick close-ups of him putting this recording device together, and I'm like, this is cool. Like this is really well done. And then it goes in a very different direction. It's
almost like gritty, almost like in those opening scenes. And I agree that first shot is really well done.
It's kind of like hard greenish fluorescent light. I'm like, wow, this is moody. It's atmospheric. Yeah. And then it kind of took a little bit of a departure.
Then they start acting, and you start to realize, I agree. I think it starts off on an interesting note, and then kind of goes downhill from there. But so just to get, I usually talk about behind the scenes stuff after, but just to get this out of the way, they filmed these scenes between Ricky and Dr. Henry Bloom is his name. They filmed them in 10 days apparently. So, I'm sorry. So I got that wrong. The entirety of the new footage.
I was going to say 10
was
days
filmed
just
in
that.
10 days. I'm sorry, was filmed in 10 days, which is like almost nothing if you're filming a movie. The scenes between Ricky and Dr. Henry Bloom were shot over the course of 2 days. So now just have that in your mind for the rest of this, and it starts to make sense. The producers were just trying to save money. That was their main concern. It was like, how can we do this the cheapest way possible? So it takes a good half hour, like I said, and until Ricky begins to start telling his own story. And then we get some new footage coming in, and Ricky's adopted by the Rosenbergs. Nice family.
A nice Jewish family.
Nice Jewish family. Yeah. So no Christmas imagery you had to worry about or anything like that. Yeah. Which I actually thought was pretty funny.
Yeah, that's a great solution. It's like, how do we make him not snap until he's an adult? Well, we put him with people who won't celebrate Christmas. But
exactly.
But it's like, I like that he just never saw Santa Claus. He's a Jewish kid growing up in the 1980s.
Jeremy, you never, on
TV,
you never see.
I actually didn't even know who Santa was until I saw this movie. So it was really enlightening. I'm glad
I could show you. This is exactly who Santa is. He kills people.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. That's I was thinking that was probably.
Yeah. Only if you're naughty. So Ricky is adopted by the Rosenbergs as a child from the orphanage, and he's having these flashbacks to, what obviously pretty traumatizing. Not only what was happening with the nuns and the way they punished the kids, but also just seeing his brother get killed by police.
His brother murder people and get killed, and his parents. He was also, Santa. Internalized. I mean, the motivation is definitely there for these characters. There's no lack of.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's there if you want to look for it. So eventually, as a young man, I guess Ricky's kind of walking along this park or, outside area, and he sees a man being naughty with a woman. They're kind of like having, I guess, like a picnic or something, and the guy starts assaulting the woman and throwing her down and stuff like that. And Ricky sees this and does not like it and gets in the car that's parked there, and so he runs the man over and over and over. He kind of just keeps doing it. And this is the first killing of Ricky, and it leads to I think one of the funniest lines in the movie, or like one of the more quotable lines. It cuts from this flashback that Ricky's having to the doctor, writing his notes, and he just writes the words "red car" with an exclamation point at the end, and that's the only thing that's on the paper, I believe.
Yeah.
From everything he's just told him, that he just killed the man, and and Ricky looks over his shoulder and he goes, "Red car, good point." And that's like the first instance of like just really laughable like dialogue that's happening, and well, maybe not the first, but one of the more notable ones.
It's weird because when he's just telling his brother's story, he's just telling a story. So you're not really seeing, you're not really getting too much of a sense of who Ricky is. But when he starts telling his own story, you really find out what's going on with this guy.
Yeah, exactly. Get into his head a little bit. But yeah, I guess that was the only note the doctor had about that it was a red car that he killed the man.
If it was a blue car, it might be a different discussion, but it was a red car.
Yeah, it makes all the difference. And then from there, we get this, I'm going to call it an oddly beautiful scene of, there's a loan shark, or I guess a mafia criminal guy in an alleyway, and he's like beating up on a guy who owes him money. And Ricky's like, he's working a job, and he goes out the back and sees this, and he ends up killing the guy. He shoves an umbrella through him and opens it. So he like essentially stabs through him with the umbrella. Yeah,
which is a blunt object. There's no blade on this umbrella. It's a dull umbrella.
Right, but suspension of disbelief.
But they show us an extreme close up of this dull umbrella. Like there's no question. Like it's a dull umbrella. Because they didn't even hide it. They could have just showed it. Oh well, maybe it's one of those umbrellas that's kind of pointy. It was a blunt object, but he's just that strong.
That's true. Yeah. They could have made it like a quick. Yeah, I guess they kind of linger on it a little bit, but anyway, it's like the imagery of it is something. It comes through, opens up, and it starts to rain. Like as Ricky walks away, he goes back to work, I guess, and it's sort of like this oddly like beautiful like moment where it's just raining on this bloody umbrella that's opened up, and it's just like, wow. Okay. Anyway, so and then we go to the next scene where so eventually there's this woman, Jennifer, who Ricky starts to date and starts to have an affinity for, and he's like the first character that besides the Rosenbergs that we see Ricky having like a sort of normal relationship with, I guess, and they eventually go to a movie together, sitting in a theater, and another bizarre moment here, Jeremy. I want to talk about this because so. Even the movie that they go to see in the theater
is silent.
Is reused footage from the first one. So the movie within this movie is from the first movie. So which is really surreal, and I thought possibly tongue in cheek. I couldn't really tell, but I mean probably it was mostly just, as we said, practical, like money wise,
because they already had the rights.
But it almost feels tongue in cheek because they even bring attention to it. They say, he goes like, "What's this movie about?" And she's like, "Oh, a maniac Santa who kills people." So it's like
he's just like, "What?"
Yeah, he's like, oh, weird.
Like, that's weird.
What a coincidence.
And it like is his brother.
So it's like, it's almost like I didn't know if they were doing that in like a tongue-in-cheek way, where it's like supposed to be funny. Or
they're also, and I hadn't looked beforehand. I just watched this blind, so I didn't know if it was the same director or not. But they were critiquing the movie as it was happening. They're like,
it's like, oh, he's gonna go down there and
get down there without a flashlight. Yeah, right. It's like you're critiquing the movie that you're using to make money.
Yeah,
like
which actually, I thought was pretty funny, but so yeah, it's kind of like a clever meta joke, or maybe just they were reusing the footage and they wanted to make a couple comments about it. I don't know.
But it's just one of those things too where we're talking about them like eating up screen time, because a big part of this movie, which we'll get into a little bit more, because there's some questionable things that I'd like to discuss. But a big part of it is them probably trying to just meet about an hour and 20 minutes of runtime, but not having enough time to shoot that. So they just use this other movie because there was no reason to ever actually show footage from this movie. In the movie, they easily could have just had the scene, put some like they could have even put the music and then just like had some like Charlie Brown dialogue in the background. That would have taken them 5 minutes to record on set. You just set someone up with a mic and then just have them talk about anything.
the sound and the dialogue that you hear from the movie, is it even from the first movie? I can't like.
Some of it is, and I think the song is the opening song, because I actually, having watched them on the same day, I recognize the opening piece of music as the thing that was in the movie here. I'm like, oh, that's clever. They're just using the music. And I was kind of expecting to like hear like the dun dun dun, like the big when it switches, but I wasn't expecting them to cut to it, and then they did, and it was, it took it to that next level.
Yeah, it's it's very strange. So anyway, I think at this point the killings start. I mean, at least I thought they started to get a little more, like even more over the top and like cartoonish.
Yeah.
And so Ricky still has this naughty thing in his mind. So the guy in the seats behind him, I guess, is acting naughty and like, you know, shouting out the screen and like being obnoxious and all that.
Which I thought that guy was so funny.
Yeah, that guy was he was pretty funny.
So funny.
But Ricky doesn't like him, and he doesn't think it's very funny, and he goes and I guess murders him or beats him up. I'm not really sure, but they show the man's legs like flailing behind the movie theater seats. Like it's almost like that's what like the word cartoonish came to mind when I saw that. And then so then we get the scene with that really sets everything off on this kind of killing spree that Ricky goes on. We see Jennifer's old boyfriend Chip. You know, and once you see a character named Chip in a movie, you know they're just going to
bad news.
Yeah,
there's no good Chips.
A real jerk, you know.
Yeah.
There's no good Chips.
Except chocolate chips, but outside.
If you are a good chip, yeah. If you are a good chip,
Potato chips.
Write to us. Let us know.
Yeah.
I do like those kind. Yeah. So he is kind of brazenly, I would say, flirting with Jessica in front of Ricky. Ricky does not appreciate this. And we have the scene where he has the jumper cables hooked up, the hood up in the car, and Ricky takes one of them and clamps the jumper cable inside Chip's mouth, which made my teeth feel weird. Like hurt my teeth watching that. And then he turns up the voltage, I guess, and we see Chip's eyes explode, which is just cool. Like nonsensical as all hell, but cool. Again, like slasher movies, you want to one-up things and you know bring things to another level. That's how you do it, right?
No, it's once again great visual.
Yeah,
very inventive.
And then so he turns on Jennifer at this point, and like we mentioned in the first movie, with Billy turning on the female employee who he is supposed to be helping in that scene. We kind of get the same thing here where. I guess Jennifer's like, "Oh, you're crazy," or "What are you doing?" And Ricky turns on her and ends up killing her, and he also kills a cop in the scene. And he goes on sort of like a killing spree here, leading up to what has become a very famous internet meme, and I'd be remiss not to mention it. And my favorite line from the movie, which is "Garbage Day," when someone's taking out their garbage, and Ricky just decides to randomly kill him,
murder him,
and just the way he says that line and proceeds to shoot this man, and the editing also is very strange in this part. It was like kind of cuts back and forth for some reason, and this has gone on to become a bit of a meme online, and the first time I even found out about this movie was because someone showed me this clip on their phone. They just like, "Yo, you got to watch this at work one day," and I was like, I need to watch that movie, whatever it is. So I found out more about it, and that's why I had seen part 2 before I'd seen part 1, because I wanted to check that out. And yeah, I'm glad I did, because it led me on this journey. But it's funny how something small and viral like that can just lead to all this everything else. But so the cops confront Ricky at this point, and Ricky puts a gun to his head, and I guess going to kill himself, and he pulls the trigger, but there's no more bullets. So. And then at this point, he's actually finishing telling his story to the doctor, and actually a pretty good reveal here. I thought when Ricky, the camera kind of follows Ricky walking in the room towards the door, and he's like, "All right, hope you had a good session," or whatever, whatever dumb line he says, and he just walks out the door, and you see the psychiatrist, I guess, was strangled to death by the reels of tape that he was using to record the audio,
which was set up nicely because we got those close-ups earlier on. Like that's the confusing thing.
Another like nice shot there.
Like that's the confusing thing with this movie is there's some things that are just done really beautifully, and then
other things.
Yeah, and it might have just been a time thing. I don't know.
I wonder if it's like he spent more time on certain shots.
Yeah, like maybe they shot the interview stuff in the first 2 days, and they were all excited and like
taking
really
their
focused.
time. Yeah.
But then they went and like shot.
Then they were like, "Oh shit, we have to film the rest of this movie."
Yeah, like damn, yeah, we spent 2 whole days shooting one scene basically in an office, and now we have to go blow up a car.
Yeah, that's probably what happened, honestly. Yeah. So he leaves the room and essentially breaks out of the institution, I guess, by posing as the psychiatrist, and he goes to find Mother Superior. So he gets Yeah, we now see him dressed in a Santa garb. You know, he's got the costume on. He's in a phone booth, and he's calling Mother Superior at the orphanage and says, "Merry Christmas, Santa's back." And and there he goes. So he goes to the orphanage, and he comes up the stairs with an axe, much like his brother, and you know, "I got a present for you." And then he confronts Mother Superior in her room, and this may be the dumbest line I've ever heard in a movie. I think I can say that. He confronts her, and she says, "You're being very, very naughty." And he goes, "Naughty this," and hoists his axe up, and that line makes zero sense.
Yeah,
anyway,
there were a few. There were a few in here that
there's
definitely...
a few, but that one in particular like
You're
offended
kinda
me. I was like, "Oh man,
yeah, that's interesting."
they actually went through with that. Wow.
Yeah.
So you see him kind of like raise his axe there, and so the next scene, the police come, and it's like these two detectives, and they come and walk up to Mother Superior, who she's in a wheelchair at this point, and they walk up to her, and Ricky's nowhere to be seen, and she, I don't know how this is possible either, but she, the one detective like puts her hand on her, and her head falls off. Mm-hmm. The Mother Superior's head falls off and kind of rolls to the ground. Which implies that, you know, I guess Ricky had chopped her head off. So he's in the background there, and he raises his axe towards the police, and they shoot him, and he falls backwards out the window, and the cop who's on the ground looks over at the head and screams, and at the scream we see Ricky outside laying on the ground. His eyes snap open, and he's still alive. So he's more in the tradition, I guess, of the...
Ricky might come back.
The other slashers, yeah. And that's Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2.
Indeed,
that's how it ends. Wow, what a movie. Yeah, if you can make it through that first half hour, there are some treats.
It's definitely worth it. Yeah, for sure.
And this movie definitely has a cred now. It has, people devoted to it, and they go to conventions and showings of it, and they have the actors come out. And, I think for a long time, this main actor who plays Ricky, Eric Freeman, I think he was kind of hard to pin down, or he didn't want to come out, and maybe he was embarrassed about the movie or for his own reasons, whatever. Mm-hmm. But he's eventually come around, much like the actor in the first one who played Billy. Mm-hmm. At first, I don't know if he bought into the controversy or what, but he was, he didn't feel very comfortable with the movie. But he's since, years and years later, come around, and he will meet up with fans of the movie and talk about the movie in person and stuff like that. So people have come around on it. The director of this film I want to talk about really briefly because it's interesting in a different way from the first film. We had this kind of like lifer in the business who'd been around, maybe not making these kinds of films, but he had been in the business as a director and things like that. But the director of Part 2, his name is Lee Harry, he was primarily an editor. And I found that it was interesting. They picked him because he's an editor to direct this film, because he really didn't have any experience being a director, and he didn't really want to be a director. And if you look at his credits, he's mostly an editor. So it's interesting that he was the one to direct this, but it makes a certain kind of sense when you think about it because of how much old footage that was being used, and all the editing tricks that would go into making this a full-length feature film. You certainly had to have some knowledge of editing for sure. And he, I believe, also edited the film as well. So it's kind of like he was coming at it from both angles. So he was involved on both sides with it.
They also might have been able to save some money by hiring someone to direct and edit, because they're like, we'll pay you now. He's like, if I can direct, I'll do it for this price.
Yeah. And speaking of money, I want to talk about that a little bit, because that clearly went into, or the lack of money, I guess, went into why this film even exists, which is funny because to me, it's like, why even make a sequel? But I guess if you think you can make enough money from it, then
totally.
Even if you don't have the funds initially, maybe you can make something off of it.
We're still talking about the 80s at this point. We're still. It's not. It was just a few years later, and the controversy was probably still in the. It's not like there was internet culture back then. Things probably moved a little bit slower. So the controversy was still probably in the back of people's minds. It hadn't totally disappeared 3 years later. Especially the re-release came in 86 and did well. So, it kind of makes sense. They're probably like, there's a good money. One thing I was thinking of, this is just a random thing, but it was a logic trap that I did in my head. Ricky was supposed to be 1 year old when the parents were murdered, right?
Don't bring logic into this.
No. But we need it because I think this takes Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 to a whole other level. So he was 1 year. Well, he was 1 when the parents were murdered, and his brother was, I believe, 7. Because I think that was the number. I think they said
something
it.
like that.
I think they said it. I was 1 and he was 7. Okay. All right. So the brother went on his murder spree when he was 18. So that's 11 years later, right? Which would make Ricky 12 years old when all that happened. Which would mean that when this happened was 6 years after the events that happened in the other movie. The other movie happened in 1984, which would put this movie in 1990, which was 3 years after the movie came out. So Silent Deadly Night is not only one of the most interesting wild movies of all time, it's also set in the future, which is kind of cool, you know.
Also, their name changed. Their last name, I think, is like different. Between the two movies. So, like, you know, obviously they were taking liberties here. I mean, I don't think they were too beholden to what had transpired. Well, they weren't, and they were, because they were literally showing you.
They showed it
of the first movie.
I just thought that was interesting. This was a movie set in the 90s, made in the 80s.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, it's if you try to think of it logically, it just makes your brain hurt.
Yeah, it really does.
And like we said, you know, the fact that Ricky as a character was hardly in the first one at all. I mean, he is there in certain scenes, but particularly the end. But it's just interesting because it's like, how does he know this? Like, you know, certain things that he just would not know about. But anyway, like we said, certain liberties were taken. And on the DVD commentary, apparently, the filmmakers talk a little bit about what went on behind the scenes, you know, in regards to money and things like that. And they said that they were paid a dismal amount of money to make the film. Of course. And originally, their idea was to... So originally, they were told to re-edit the first film and pass it off as a sequel. So it was actually Lee Harry, the director of this film, who said that he didn't want to do that, and he demanded that a new film be shot. You know, if he was going to direct it, that he wanted to actually shoot new footage. Though he didn't have the budget, obviously, to create an entirely new story, so he did the best of both worlds, I guess, which is pretty clever, you know, creative, I guess. Like I said, the first third of this film is essentially the first one, but with little wraparound scenes. And then it goes off to be its own film. So he saw a way around that, I guess. And I actually have a quote from him that I found, you know, just to kind of give you a little more insight. He says, I was an editor at a small post-production facility in Burbank, and the guy who ran the place was approached by the people who owned the original Silent Night, Deadly Night, and asked if we could take the movie, recut it, and add some footage to try to get a little more shelf life out of it. So that shows you where their head's at. There were 4 of us who were editors who just watched the first movie over and over again and came up with what we thought was a decent backstory and then wrote a script around the existing footage.
That's awesome.
So they literally made the film from scratch, like just based off the footage of the first movie that they wanted to use, which is pretty interesting.
Oh, that's great.
One of the last things I want to talk about here, Jeremy, is just like,
how it's
again, the audacity, like the sheer audacity to pull something like this is just something else. And reusing so much footage from the first film, I mean, I feel like this is something you wouldn't be able to get away with now in this day and age. I mean, do you agree with that?
Quite frankly, I don't know how they got away with it then.
Even then,
I don't know if that's a result of the time or it's just people who just decided that they were going to take advantage of the name and just literally couldn't give less. Because, I mean, this one wasn't a big hit. It didn't do great financially.
Well, it did okay.
It did okay?
So it got pulled. Well, it got pulled even sooner than the first movie. It got pulled a week, I think, into its run. So like a full week before the first one was. So it did pretty good on video, though.
Yeah.
So, much like the first one. So I mean, these kinds of movies like slasher horror films, I feel like video market was really what they were going for.
Which so they accomplished their goal because and I think that's the thing. I don't think there's the same kind of video market now because people are so used to getting new TV shows and movies now. That like if there's going to be a sequel for something, it's because it's been a massive hit and they're going to throw a lot of money at it to make another one. Whereas
the franchise,
because you don't really see that much low budget stuff hitting these days. And if it does, it's normally like an indie darling where they're not going to bother making a sequel.
We've talked about that with our indie series too. Like our kind of conclusion of that was that this can't really happen in that certain way, I guess, anymore.
Yeah, because there's kind of different spaces. Whereas then I think that these kind of schlock movies were a lot more bankable. Like they made a lot more money, so there was a lot more of a motivation to just use the name and say, hey, you know, if we can make it for like they probably the decisions probably weren't made by filmmakers. They were probably literally made by like accountants running the numbers. Saying, well, this is what we know we can sell to a distributor. Like they probably even had pre-sale. Honestly, they probably like had someone who said like, if you make another Silent Deadly Night movie, we don't even give a shit what it is. We'll pay you X thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
However they could justify it.
Yeah, and they probably said, all right, to get our our ROI, our return on investment, to be the number we want, we have to make the movie for less than this amount of money. And that's what they did, which was probably a very small amount, because it wasn't like they were, doing a Halloween movie. They were doing a Silent Night, Deadly Night movie.
Right. Yeah. It all comes down to money.
Although I will say, what we were saying before a little bit, is this movie was kind of weird in terms of the use of the budget, because like Mark and I, are, as we've mentioned many times before, are both filmmakers and have both done low budget projects. And there are creative solutions you can take with a low budget project to not spend all your money on stuff you don't need to. And they did not do that at all in this movie, which I think was interesting, because like it's for those of you who don't know necessarily like what's expensive to do with filmmaking, like they blew up a car in this movie. It's never cheap to blow up a car. They also flipped a car in this movie. They threw people through windows. Yeah. So like there was stuff in
unnecessarily. Like they didn't need to do.
Yeah, they didn't need it. They could have just had him get shot a bunch of times and fall on the floor. Right. They didn't have to blow up the car. They could have just... So, like, that's what was so weird. Is there was stuff in
like
this
they
movie...
went out of the... Well, also, like, maybe they knew... Yeah. Like we said, like, maybe they knew the killings were, like, the selling point, and, like... Yeah. Maybe they did want to put all their money into that.
Or it was trailer fodder, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just a thing where it was, like, they knew that they wanted their trailer to be a car blowing up, someone going through a window... Yeah. So maybe it was that, but in terms of actually making a good movie, they didn't, I don't think, really spent their resources in the best way. But once again...
They forgot that part, yeah.
If they
forgot to make a good movie.
Yeah, if they made their money, though, and the goal of this project was making money, they succeeded. Like at the end of the day...
It did okay, yeah. It did...
We can talk about the artistic merit of the movie all we want, but if their goal, you set out at the beginning of any project, be it creative or business, whatever, and you set your goals, and if you meet those goals, it's a success. So in that regard... I would have to say that Silent Night Deadly Night 2 Part 2, or Silent Night Deadly Night Part 2 rather, is a success. It did
I would even say they exceeded their goals. Yeah. I mean, we're still talking about it
that's true.
Today.
Yeah,
no one's talking about
30 plus years later, we're still we're having extended discussion. It's an internet meme. They didn't even know what the internet was when they made this movie.
Yeah, it's a cult movie, which you can't say for every movie. So. It's gone on to have a life, certainly on video, and it used to be in person showings before COVID and everything. But
hopefully soon enough.
Yes, hopefully we can get back out and seeing bad movies in person like it should be seen.
Exactly.
It definitely has a life. The first one and the second one, I guess more the second one, because it has a lot more of the hammy acting and kind of bizarre behavior in it, and the kills are just so over the top. And you still get a lot of the kills from the first one. They still show you some of those. So it's got it all in there. I'm glad you got to see these, Jeremy.
Me too.
Hopefully they become traditions,
For sure. One more small note, just because I have a graphic design background, and I like to talk about this whenever we get the opportunity, especially with slasher films, because the posters and the art was such a big part of it. Both Silent Night Deadly Night and Silent Night Deadly Night Part 2, I thought had really cool posters. Particularly Silent Night Deadly Night Part 2, it actually looks like they spent some money on the poster, which is funny. Really beautiful painting or illustration of a Christmas ornament with a reflected hand holding a gun, and you can kind of tell it's Santa. And it's a really, really beautiful piece of artwork.
It's pretty good, yeah.
It's great, yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting, but I think that's the thing with anytime you talk about a slasher film, the poster or the VHS cover are just as important sometimes as the film itself for how it held up over the years.
Even the first one with his arm,
the arm
coming out of the chimney with the axe.
Yeah, really cool posters for both of these.
They did it right. Whether or not, again, you want to say these are bad movies or not, they did what they set out to do.
Yeah, totally.
With this film,
100%.
With both these films. So
cool.
It was fun rewatching them and keep up the tradition. We'll do another movie next year, but maybe we'll watch this one too, just for fun.
just for ourselves.
I still call them one movie.
Yeah, exactly.
There's still one movie in my head.
I wonder if anyone will be bold enough at some point to do like a Francis Ford Coppola, just like cut them both together and
Redux.
Redux. Yeah, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Redux. Where it's actually it wouldn't be that long because the second one, if you cut all the original footage out, would probably only be about 40 minutes long. So you just get a good 2 hour long
There you go.
Story of two brothers. It's
roadshow version of it.
Yeah, the roadshow. You maybe throw a little intermission in between. Yeah, you sell some eggnog. You know, it's a good time.
Someone tell Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, exactly.
Produce it.
Yeah.
On that note, thanks, Jeremy, for another great holiday episode. Happy holidays to you, 2020.
Likewise.
Hopefully next year is somewhat normal. We'll see.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, we'll still be here talking about weird cult movies. And thanks very much for listening to this holiday special of Cult Movie Cult. You can find us, as always, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you have any cult films you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, or if you'd like to officially join the cult, be a guest on the show, please feel free to reach out to us at cultmoviecult@gmail.com. This has been Cult Movie Cult. Until next time, so long from the other side, and happy holidays.
Naughty. It's like naughty. Punish.
Punish.